Hey there, and welcome to Crazy Pepper, the channel where drama sizzles and revenge burns hotter than ever. If you love jaw dropping twists, bold characters, and stories that keep you guessing till the end, you're in the right place. Subscribe and dive into gripping tales of betrayal, karma, and ultimate payback. Get ready for unforgettable moments and satisfying endings, only on Crazy Pepper. Hit that, though, and let the drama begin. The furnace screamed like an animal. 3,000 degrees of molten steel erupted from the cracked crucible, sending orange sparks cascading across the foundry floor. Workers scattered, their boots echoing against concrete as alarms shrieked through the morning air. I grabbed the emergency shutoff valve, my gloves smoking from the heat radiating off the steel pipes. The valve fought me, 30 years of grime and pressure making it stubborn as a mule. Around me, voices shouted coordinates and temperatures, but I blocked them out. This was my domain. I'd been working steel since I was 19, and no machine was going to win today. "Lyle," Tommy Greco hollered from across the floor. "Temperature's still climbing." The valve finally gave. The furnace settled into an angry rumble, orange light fading to dull red. Steam hissed from cooling pipes as the emergency passed. Just another Tuesday at Allegheny Steelworks. I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my sleeve, leaving a streak of soot. The other workers nodded their approval. Nobody said much, we weren't the talking type, but respect was earned in moments like these. "Nice work, Rake," said Jim Costello, our floor supervisor. He was a decent man, tough but fair. "Take 15, you earned it." I walked toward the break area, my steel-toed boots clanging against the metal grating. The morning shift was settling into its rhythm now. The controlled chaos of industrial production that had been my life for nearly 2 decades. That's when I saw her. Nina's friend, Carla, stood near the visitor entrance, looking completely out of place in her clean white blouse and pressed slacks. She fidgeted with her purse strap, eyes scanning the foundry floor like she was afraid something might attack her. I approached slowly, suspicious. Carla had never set foot in the plant before. Hell, most of Nina's friends acted like my job was something shameful, like I was some kind of caveman who worked with his hands instead of sitting behind a computer all day. "Carla? What are you doing here?" She turned, relief flooding her face. "Lyle, thank God, I need to talk to you." "About what?" She glanced around nervously, watching the workers move past us. "Not here. Can we go somewhere private?" I led her to the small office Jim let me use for union business. It smelled like coffee and machine oil, with stacks of safety reports covering the metal desk. Carla perched on the edge of a folding chair like she might need to run. "This is about Sophie's wedding this weekend, isn't it?" I said. Her face went pale. "How did you know?" "Lucky guess. What's wrong?" Carla opened her mouth, then closed it. She did this twice before finally speaking. "You need to be there, Lyle. At the wedding." "Something's not right." "What do you mean, not right?" "I can't explain it. Just pay attention. Really, pay attention." She stood up abruptly, clutching her purse. "I have to go. But Lyle?" "Be careful." Before I could ask what the hell she meant, she was gone, her heels clicking rapidly across the concrete as she hurried toward the exit. I stood alone in the office, staring at the door she'd just walked through. Outside, the foundry continued its steady rhythm, but something cold had settled in my chest. Carla's warning felt like standing too close to the furnace dangerous heat that you couldn't quite identify until it was too late. The Andel wedding was being held at the Riverside Country Club, one of those places that tried too hard to look expensive. White columns, perfectly manicured lawns, and a parking lot full of German cars that cost more than most people made in a year. I adjusted my tie in the truck's rearview mirror. Nina had bought me the suit 2 years ago for her company Christmas party. Dark blue, nothing fancy, but it fit well enough. She'd said I looked handsome in it back when she still said things like that. "You clean up nice for a steelworker," she'd said, playfully adjusting my collar. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. Nina emerged from our house wearing a red dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. She'd spent 2 hours getting ready, curling her dark hair and applying makeup with the precision of an artist. At 34, she still turned heads when she walked into a room. "Ready?" she asked, sliding into the passenger seat. "Ready?" The drive took 20 minutes through suburban Pittsburgh, past strip malls and chain restaurants. Nina chatted about work, complaining about her boss at the courier company where she coordinated logistics. Same complaints as always. Not enough money, not enough respect, not enough excitement. I swear, If I have to route one more delivery truck to some podunk town in West Virginia, I'm going to lose my mind, she said, checking her lipstick in the passenger mirror. It's honest work, I said. Honest and boring, she snapped the mirror shut. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd taken that job in Philadelphia when I was 25. You'd have been miserable in a city that size. Would I? There was something in her tone, a wistfulness that I'd been hearing more often lately, like she was already somewhere else in her mind, just waiting for her body to catch up. We pulled into the country club parking lot. Nina immediately perked up, scanning the crowd of wedding guests streaming toward the entrance. She loved events like this, the chance to dress up, drink good wine, and gossip with friends she only saw a few times a year. There's Sophie, she said, pointing toward the bride who was greeting guests near the main entrance. Sophie Andel looked radiant in her white gown, surrounded by family and friends taking photos. We made our way through the crowd, Nina stopping every few feet to air kiss someone or compliment a dress. I followed behind, nodding politely and shaking hands when introduced. These weren't my people, but I knew how to play the game. The ceremony was held in the club's garden pavilion, rows of white chairs arranged in perfect symmetry facing a flower-covered arch. Nina and I found seats near the back, close enough to see but far enough away that I could observe without being observed. That's when I noticed him. Max and Clive stood near the front with the wedding party, tall and confident in an expensive charcoal suit. I'd heard Nina mention him before. He was Mike Andel's college roommate, some kind of tech entrepreneur from the city. The kind of guy who wore his success like cologne, making sure everyone could smell it. He had the look of someone who'd never worked a day of manual labor in his life. Soft hands, perfect teeth, hair styled with product that probably cost more than my lunch. When he smiled, it was the practiced expression of someone who was used to getting what he wanted. During the ceremony, I caught Nina glancing in his direction more than once. The reception moved to the club's main ballroom, a cavernous space with crystal chandeliers and windows overlooking the golf course. Round tables covered in white linens filled the room, each one decorated with elaborate flower arrangements that probably cost more than most people's weekly salary. Nina immediately gravitated toward the bar, ordering something with vodka while I nursed a beer. The room filled with conversation and laughter as guests mingled during the cocktail hour. Lyle Rake, right? The voice belonged to Max and Clive, who'd materialized beside me with the smooth confidence of a politician. That's right. He extended his hand. Maxon. I've heard Nina mention you. His handshake was firm but brief, the grip of someone who'd learned the importance of first impressions. Up close, I could see he was probably 35, with the kind of lean build that came from expensive gym memberships and personal trainers. Nina talks about your work sometimes, he continued. Steel production, right? That must be fascinating. The way he said fascinating made it clear he found it anything but. I'd heard that tone before from Nina's friends, polite condescension disguised as interest. It has its moments, I said. I imagine it does. Very physical work. Someone has to make the steel that holds up those office buildings. He laughed, a sound like expensive wine being poured. True enough. Well, it was good to meet you, Lyle. Enjoy the party. He melted back into the crowd, immediately engaging another group in animated conversation. I watched him work the room, noting how people gravitated toward him, how he commanded attention without seeming to try. Nina returned with her drink, slightly flushed from the alcohol and social excitement. Having fun? She asked. Sure. You? Sophie looks beautiful, doesn't she? And this place is gorgeous. Must have cost a fortune. She surveyed the room with obvious envy, taking in the expensive decorations and well-dressed guests. This was the kind of life she wanted. Sophisticated, moneyed, far removed from steel foundries and blue-collar neighborhoods. Dinner was served at 7:30, a 3-course meal that tasted like it had been prepared by actual chefs instead of cafeteria workers. Nina chatted with the other women at our table, laughing at jokes I couldn't hear over the background music and conversation. Around 9 o'clock, she excused herself to use the restroom. That was perfectly normal. Nina was social, always finding excuses to mingle and catch up with people she hadn't seen in months. But she was gone for 20 minutes. When she returned, her cheeks were flushed and her lipstick was slightly smudged. She seemed distracted, constantly glancing toward other parts of the room. Everything okay? I asked. Fine, just ran into some old friends. She took a large gulp of her wine and immediately signaled the waiter for another glass. Her hands were slightly unsteady, though whether from alcohol or something else, I couldn't tell. The dancing started around 10, with Sophie and her new husband taking the floor for their first dance. Other couples joined them gradually, the ballroom filling with swaying bodies and soft music. "Want to dance?" I asked Nina. "Maybe later. I need some air." She walked toward the terrace doors, leaving me alone at our table. Through the windows, I could see her standing on the stone patio, talking on her phone. Even from a distance, her body language looked tense. I waited 5 more minutes before following her outside. The terrace was mostly empty, just a few smokers clustered near the far end. Nina stood near the railing overlooking the golf course, her phone pressed to her ear. "I can't talk about this now," she was saying in a low voice. "Not here." She noticed me approaching and quickly ended the call. "Work?" I asked. "My sister, she's having drama with her boyfriend again." It was a smooth lie, delivered without hesitation. But I knew Nina's tells, the way she avoided eye contact when she wasn't being truthful, how her voice got slightly higher. We rejoined the reception, but the rest of the evening felt off. Nina drank more than usual and seemed distracted, her attention constantly wandering to other parts of the room. When she thought I wasn't looking, I caught her texting someone. Around midnight, we said our goodbyes and headed home. Nina fell asleep in the passenger seat, her head against the window. In the darkness, I replayed the evening's events, trying to identify what had felt wrong. Carla's warning echoed in my mind. "Pay attention. Really pay attention." I had been paying attention, and what I'd seen was my wife of 8 years lying to me about a phone call, disappearing for extended periods, and acting like a stranger in familiar surroundings. When we got home, Nina went straight to bed without saying goodnight. I sat in my recliner for another hour, staring at the dark television screen and thinking about Max and Clive's handshake, Nina's smudged lipstick, and the careful way she'd avoided my eyes when she lied about that phone call. In the kitchen, I found an old composition notebook I used for union notes. I opened it to a fresh page and wrote a single word in block letters: disassemble. Then I closed the notebook and went to bed. The voice memo came 3 days later. I was eating lunch in the Foundry break room, scrolling through my phone while Tommy Greco complained about his ex-wife's lawyer. The notification popped up just after noon, a voice message from Nina's number. I put in my earbuds and hit play, expecting some reminder about picking up groceries or calling the cable company. Instead, I heard Nina's voice, but she wasn't talking to me. "Told you he has no idea," she was saying, laughing. "Lyle's sweet, but he's not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed. He sees what he wants to see." Another woman's voice. "Carla," I realized. "Are you sure? He seemed suspicious at the wedding." "Trust me, I know my husband. He's too focused on his precious steel mill to notice anything else. Besides, even if he suspected something, what's he going to do? Follow me around? Hire a private detective?" More laughter. "The man reads John Steinbeck novels for fun, Carla. He thinks life is like one of those dusty books where the good guys always win and everyone gets what they deserve. It's actually kind of sad. What about Maxon? Is he worried?" "Maxon doesn't worry about anything. That's what I love about him. He's so confident, so sure of himself. Nothing like—" The message cut off abruptly. I sat in the break room for a full minute, staring at my phone screen. Around me, the usual lunch conversation continued. Sports, politics, complaints about management. But I felt like I was hearing everything through water, distant and distorted. Nina had sent the message by mistake, probably while fumbling with her phone. The kind of technical error that happens to everyone eventually, except this time it had revealed something I wasn't supposed to hear. I saved the message to my phone's memory and deleted it from the main list. Then I finished my sandwich and went back to work, spending the afternoon operating the hydraulic press with mechanical precision, while my mind processed what I'd learned. My wife was having an affair with Max and Clive. She thought I was too stupid to notice, and she was discussing our marriage like it was some kind of joke. That evening, I watched Nina make dinner, studying her face for signs of deception. She seemed perfectly normal, chatting about her day, complaining about traffic, asking about my work, the same routine we'd followed for years. "How was the foundry today?" she asked, stirring sauce on the stove. "Fine. Had to recalibrate the hydraulic press. The pressure readings were off." She wasn't really listening, her attention focused on her phone as it buzzed with text messages. "Everything okay?" "Just Carla. She's having issues with her landlord." Another lie, delivered with practiced ease. I wondered how many lies I'd accepted over the past few months without questioning them. After dinner, Nina settled onto the couch with her laptop, claiming she needed to work on scheduling reports. I retreated to the garage, ostensibly to organize my tools, but really to think. The garage had always been my sanctuary, a place where everything had its proper location and purpose. Hand tools arranged by size on pegboard walls, power tools stored in labeled cases, nuts and bolts sorted into small drawers. It was the opposite of the chaos inside the foundry, a space where I could impose perfect order. I pulled out my composition notebook and started writing, not emotions or feelings. Those were useless now, but facts, dates, times, observations. Nina's behavior at the wedding, the phone call on the terrace, the voice memo, her increased use of her phone, the new passwords I'd noticed her setting, evidence. Over the following weeks, I began to pay attention in ways I never had before. Not obvious surveillance. Nina was right that I wasn't built for cloak and dagger nonsense, but simple awareness. I noted when she worked late, when she went out with friends, when she seemed distracted or evasive. The pattern emerged gradually. Tuesday evenings, she supposedly had dinner with Carla, but Carla worked late Tuesdays at the insurance office. Thursday afternoons, she claimed to be shopping, but she never came home with purchases. Weekend errands that took 3 hours when they should have taken one. I didn't confront her. Confrontation was for people who wanted to save their marriages, who believed in working things out and rebuilding trust. I was past that. The voice memo had shown me exactly what Nina thought of me, and I'd heard it in her own words. Instead, I began making my own plans. Jerry Sandoz owed me a favor from the old days. We'd worked together during the big steel strike of 2009 when the company tried to cut benefits and we'd spent 6 weeks on the picket line. Jerry had been our communications coordinator, setting up phone trees and coordinating with other locals. But that was before he'd gone back to school and learned about computers. Now he ran a small security consulting firm, helping businesses protect themselves from corporate espionage and employee theft. The same skills he'd learned organizing union activities, applied to a different kind of problem. I found him at Murphy's Tavern on a Thursday evening, nursing a beer and watching the Pirates lose to the Reds. He'd gained weight since the strike, his thick black hair now peppered with gray, but his eyes were still sharp. "Lyle Rake," he said when I sat down. "Haven't seen you in what, 2 years?" "Something like that." "How's business?" "Can't complain." Turns out a lot of companies need help keeping their employees honest. He signaled the bartender for another round. "What brings you out on a school night?" "I need to ask you something. And I need you to keep it between us." Jerry's expression grew serious. "What kind of something?" "The kind where you tell me it's a bad idea and I do it anyway." He studied my face for a long moment. "This about Nina?" I didn't answer directly. "You still have contacts in the surveillance business?" "Jesus, Lyle. You sure you want to go down that road?" "I'm already down it. Question is whether you're going to help me navigate or let me stumble around in the dark." Jerry drank his beer slowly, considering. "What do you need?" "Information about a guy named Maxon Clive. Where he lives, what he drives, how he makes his money. Public stuff, nothing illegal." "And then what?" "Then I decide what to do with it." Jerry shook his head but pulled out his phone. "This is a mistake, but you were there for me during the strike. Give me a couple days." 3 days later, he called with an address and a license plate number. Maxon lived in a renovated warehouse in the Strip District, drove a white Range Rover, and owned a software company that designed logistics programs for shipping companies. "He's doing well for himself," Jerry said. "Company's worth maybe $2 million, most of it tied up in equipment and contracts. Lives alone. No criminal record, pays his taxes. Boring as hell from a surveillance perspective." "What about the building?" "Converted warehouse. Industrial security system, but nothing fancy. More for show than actual protection." That weekend, I drove past Maxon's building, studying the neighborhood and traffic patterns. The Strip District was trendy now, full of young professionals who paid premium prices to live in converted industrial spaces. Maxon's building sat on a quiet side street, with limited parking and good sight lines in all directions. I also enrolled in a defensive driving course at the community college. "Since when are you interested in driving lessons?" Nina asked when she found the registration form. "Plant's making it mandatory for anyone who operates the mobile equipment." "Insurance requirement." another lie to add to our growing collection. The course met Tuesday and Thursday evenings, teaching advanced vehicle control techniques, evasive maneuvers, and emergency procedures. Useful skills for someone planning to do things he might need to quickly drive away from. At the same time, I visited the county clerk's office and filed paperwork for a separate business account, claiming I was expecting an inheritance from my deceased uncle in Ohio. The clerk barely looked at the form's bureaucratic paper processing that would establish a financial trail completely separate from our joint accounts. Nina noticed my increased activity, but seemed more annoyed than suspicious. "You're never home anymore," she complained one evening. "Between your driving classes and whatever else you're doing, I barely see you. Just trying to improve myself. Isn't that what you wanted?" She didn't have an answer for that. While Nina was at work, I went through our financial records, making copies of bank statements, investment accounts, and insurance policies. Everything was joint property under Pennsylvania law, but I wanted to understand exactly what we owned and how it could be divided. The house was worth about $200,000 with a mortgage balance of $120,000. We had roughly $40,000 in savings, another $60,000 in my retirement account, 2 cars paid off, and miscellaneous personal property. Not a fortune, but enough to make a divorce expensive and complicated. I also visited our lawyer, Terry Darnell, claiming I needed to update my will after my fictional uncle's death. Terry was actually a paralegal who did simple legal work for people who couldn't afford big firms. She'd helped us buy the house and set up basic estate planning documents. "While I'm here," I said casually, "what would happen if Nina and I ever got divorced? Hypothetically." Terry looked uncomfortable. "That's a little outside my expertise, Lyle. You'd want a family law attorney for something like that, just generally speaking. How would the assets be divided? Pennsylvania is an equitable distribution state, so the court tries to divide things fairly based on each spouse's contribution to the marriage. But there are ways to protect assets if you plan ahead." She explained the basics: separate property, business interests, the importance of documentation. I listened carefully, asking questions that sounded academic rather than urgent. By November, I had established a framework for financial independence and gathered enough information about Maxon to understand his routines and vulnerabilities. Nina continued her affair, growing bolder and more careless as her confidence increased. She was right about one thing. I wasn't built for confrontation and emotional scenes, but she was wrong about everything else. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't blind. And I wasn't going to be the sad, cuckolded husband who discovered his wife's betrayal and then spent months begging her to stay. I was going to be something much more dangerous. The Range Rover's brake lines were surprisingly easy to access. Maxon parked in the same spot every day, a premium space behind his building that cost him $200 a month. The parking area was enclosed by a high fence, but not monitored by cameras, probably because the building's residents assumed their expensive cars were safe in an exclusive neighborhood. I waited until 2:30 in the morning on a Tuesday, when the Strip District was quiet except for occasional delivery trucks heading to the produce warehouses. My work clothes were dark blue, close enough to black that I'd be nearly invisible in the shadows. The lock on the parking area gate was industrial grade but old, the kind of mechanism I'd worked with at the foundry for years. It took me less than 3 minutes to open it with tools from my garage. Maxon's Range Rover sat in the corner spot, white paint gleaming under the security lights. I crawled underneath with a small flashlight, locating the brake lines that ran from the master cylinder to the rear wheels. The technique was something I'd learned during hydraulic system training at the plant. You don't cut the lines, that's obvious and immediately dangerous. Instead, you create a small puncture that allows brake fluid to leak slowly, reducing pressure gradually until the brakes fail at the worst possible moment. I used a tiny drill bit to create a pinhole leak in the line leading to the rear brakes, then wiped away any metal shavings. The hole was so small it would take hours for enough fluid to drain, and Maxon would probably drive several times before noticing any reduction in braking power. The whole operation took less than 10 minutes. I was back home and in bed by 3:15, lying next to Nina while she slept peacefully, completely unaware that her lover's car was slowly becoming a death trap. I didn't feel guilty. Guilt was for people who hurt innocent victims. Maxon Clive had inserted himself into my marriage, treated me like a joke, and probably encouraged Nina to see me as some kind of pathetic relic. He'd earned whatever was coming. 3 days later, Jerry called with news. "Your boy had an accident," he said. "Rear-ended a delivery truck on Carson Street. Brake failure, according to the police report." "Is he hurt?" Banged up pretty good, broken ribs, concussion, some cuts from the airbag. Could have been worse. He was only going about 30 when it happened. What did the investigation find? Mechanical failure, old brake lines apparently. The insurance company's calling it wear and tear. Perfect. No criminal investigation, no suspicious circumstances, just bad luck and poor vehicle maintenance. Maxon would recover, but he'd also spend the next few weeks dealing with doctors, insurance adjusters, and the lingering anxiety that comes from having your brakes fail in traffic. Nina was unusually quiet that evening, picking at her dinner and checking her phone more often than usual. "Everything okay?" I asked. "A friend of mine was in a car accident, pretty bad." "Sorry to hear that. Anyone I know?" She hesitated. "Max and Clive from the wedding." "The tech guy? That's terrible. What happened?" "Brake failure. His car just stopped working." I made appropriate sympathetic noises while internally noting how easily she lied about their relationship. "A friend of mine instead of the man I'm having an affair with." She was getting good at deception, but she wasn't the only one. Over the following weeks, I noticed changes in Nina's behavior. She seemed more anxious, less confident. Her Tuesday evening dinners with Carla became irregular, sometimes canceled at the last minute. She started drinking more wine in the evenings, something she'd never done before. The accident had shaken Maxon's confidence, and that uncertainty was affecting Nina. Good. I wanted them both off balance, wondering if their secret was as safe as they'd thought. Meanwhile, I continued building my financial independence. The separate business account was established and growing, funded by small transfers from our joint savings that Nina wouldn't notice. I'd also begun converting some of our shared assets into forms that would be harder for her to access in a divorce. The process required patience and careful planning, qualities that steelwork had taught me. You don't rush when you're working with molten metal. One mistake can destroy you. The same principle applied to destroying a marriage. Move too fast and your target would realize what was happening in time to defend themselves. But move carefully, methodically, and by the time they understood the danger, it would be too late to escape. December brought the first real snow, and with it, new opportunities. Nina's behavior had become increasingly erratic since Maxon's accident. She snapped at me over minor issues, spent long hours texting on her phone, and developed a habit of taking mysterious phone calls that required privacy. When I asked about her mood, she blamed stress at work or problems with her friends. "You wouldn't understand," she said one evening after I'd suggested she seemed unhappy. "Your life is so simple. Go to work, come home, watch TV, no complications." Maybe simple is better than complicated. Maybe. Or maybe simple is just another word for boring. The contempt in her voice was clearer now, less carefully hidden. She was growing tired of pretending our marriage mattered to her, which meant she was probably planning her exit strategy. That's when I discovered the apartment. I was at the bank depositing my paycheck when I noticed an unusual charge on our joint account, a cashier's check for $3,500, made out to Keystone Property Management. When I asked the teller to look up the details, she explained it was for a security deposit and first month's rent on a one-bedroom apartment in Shadyside. Nina was preparing to leave me, and she was using our money to do it. That night, I drove past the address listed on the check. It was a nice building in an upscale neighborhood, the kind of place young professionals lived when they wanted to impress their friends. One-bedroom apartments probably rented for $1,800 a month, far more than Nina could afford on her logistics coordinator salary, unless someone was helping with expenses. I called Jerry the next morning. "I need more information about Max and Clive," I told him. "Financial information, income, expenses, business cash flow. That's getting into territory I can't help you with legally." "I'm not asking you to hack anything. Just public records, business filings, whatever's available through normal channels." Jerry sighed. "This is going to end badly, Lyle." It already ended badly. "I'm just deciding how to clean up the mess." He called back 2 days later with details about Maxon's software company. Annual revenue of about $600,000, most of it from contracts with shipping companies. Good money, but not enough to support both his expensive lifestyle and secret apartment for Nina, unless he was planning to make changes to his business structure. "One more thing," Jerry said. "I did some digging on that apartment building. Clive's name is on the lease as a co-signer." Of course it was. Maxon was financially backing Nina's departure from our marriage, probably planning to move her into his warehouse apartment once the divorce was finalized. They had it all worked out. Nina would claim irreconcilable differences, take half our assets, and disappear into her new life with the successful tech entrepreneur. It was a reasonable plan. It might even have worked if they'd been dealing with the kind of man Nina thought she'd married, but they weren't. That weekend, I told Nina I was going to visit my sister Maggie in Johnstown. Instead, I drove to the address where Maxon's software company was located, a small office building near the university where he rented space on the third floor. Saturday morning, the building was mostly empty, except for a cleaning crew and a few weekend workers. I waited in my truck until I saw Maxon arrive, walking carefully with a slight limp from his accident injuries. An hour later, I followed him to a coffee shop where he met with two men in expensive suits. Through the window, I watched them examine documents and laptop screens, discussing something that required a lot of pointing and nodding. After they left, I approached the coffee shop counter and made casual conversation with the barista, mentioning that I'd seen an interesting business meeting. "Oh, yeah, those guys come in here sometimes," she said. "Something about selling a company." "The tall one, Maxon, I think. He's been really excited about it, says he's about to make enough money to retire early." So that was it. Maxon was selling his software company, probably to fund his new life with Nina. The timeline made sense. Finalize the sale, help Nina through the divorce, then disappear together with enough money to start over somewhere else. They'd planned everything except for one crucial variable: me. I spent the rest of December gathering more intelligence and refining my strategy. Nina continued her preparations, becoming increasingly careless about hiding her activities. She opened her own bank account, started receiving mail at the Shadyside apartment, and had several hushed phone conversations about timing and being careful. On New Year's Eve, she claimed to be sick and stayed home while I attended the annual union party. When I returned at midnight, she was asleep, but her car was still warm from recent driving. I stood in our bedroom doorway, watching her sleep, and felt nothing but cold calculation. This woman had shared my bed for 8 years, had promised to love and honor me, had built a life based on lies and betrayal. She thought she was clever, thought she'd found a way to upgrade from a steelworker to a tech entrepreneur without consequences. She was about to learn how wrong she was. January brought the deep cold that made steelwork brutal, but I'd never felt more focused. The first phase of my plan required Nina to make a mistake, and she obliged perfectly. On a Thursday morning, she received a registered letter that required her signature. When she opened it at the breakfast table, her face went pale. "What is it?" I asked, though I already knew. "Some kind of legal notice." "I don't understand it." She handed me the document, which was written in the dense language that lawyers use to make simple things sound complicated. But the basic message was clear. Due to an investment crisis at Allegheny Steelworks, all employee retirement accounts were being frozen pending a federal investigation into pension fund management. It was completely fabricated, of course. I'd paid Terry Darnell $300 to draft the document on official-looking letterhead, then had it delivered through a mail service that specialized in legal notifications. "This is about your retirement account," Nina said, reading over my shoulder. "Looks like it. Says I need to sign over temporary control of our assets to protect them from federal seizure." "What does that mean?" "Means we need to move fast before the government freezes everything." I stood up, pacing the kitchen like a worried husband. "The letter says I have 48 hours to transfer our accounts into your name since you're not affected by the investigation." Nina's eyes lit up. This was perfect for her plans. Full control of our assets, with a legal reason for the transfer that wouldn't raise suspicions during divorce proceedings. "What do you need me to do?" "Sign some papers. Take control of the accounts temporarily until this gets resolved." We spent that afternoon at the bank with Nina signing documents that she thought gave her temporary control of our assets. In reality, the papers transferred everything into a trust account controlled by Terry Darnell, with provisions that made it nearly impossible for Nina to access the money without my consent. The bank officers were helpful and professional, treating the transaction like a routine matter of asset protection. They'd seen similar situations before, federal investigations that required quick action to prevent asset seizure. Nina was practically glowing as we left the bank. She thought she'd just gained control of our entire financial future, not realizing she'd actually lost it. That evening, she made 2 phone calls that confirmed everything I suspected. The first was to Maxon, telling him the good news about gaining control of our assets. The second was to a divorce lawyer, scheduling a consultation for the following week. I heard both calls through the heating vent that connected our bedroom to the basement, where I was supposedly organizing tools. It's perfect timing, she told the lawyer. I'll have documentation showing I've been managing our finances, and there won't be any complicated asset division issues. 3 days later, I received another call from Jerry. Your friend Maxon closed on his company sale yesterday, he said. 2.8 million, according to the Business Journal. Looks like he's officially retired. The timeline was accelerating. Maxon had his money, Nina thought she had control of our assets, and they were probably planning to file divorce papers within the week. Everything was falling into place perfectly for them. But I had one more surprise. That Saturday, while Nina was at her yoga class, which I knew was actually a meeting with Maxon, I visited the Allegheny County Recorder's office. Using the power of attorney documents Nina had signed, I transferred ownership of our house to a limited liability company I'd established through Terry Darnell. The LLC was technically owned by my fictional deceased uncle's estate, which meant Nina's name was removed from the property deed entirely. She'd gone from joint homeowner to tenant in less than a week, and she had no idea. I also used the power of attorney to liquidate our joint savings account, transferring the money to the business account I'd established months earlier. When Nina tried to access the funds, she'd find the account closed. The final step was changing the locks. I did it on a Tuesday while Nina was at work, replacing all the exterior door locks with high-security deadbolts that required special keys. I also installed a new security system that would alert me whenever someone attempted to enter the house. Then I waited. Nina came home at her usual time, tried her key, and found it wouldn't work. I watched through the front window as she tried each door, growing increasingly frustrated. Finally, she called my cell phone. Lyle, there's something wrong with the locks. I can't get in. That's strange. I'll be right there. I took my time walking to the front door, letting her wait in the cold for a few extra minutes. When I opened it, she pushed past me angrily. What the hell is going on? Why don't my keys work? I had the locks changed yesterday. Security company said there have been break-ins in the neighborhood. Without telling me? I tried to call you, but you were busy. I handed her a new key. Here, I had copies made. She took the key but continued glaring at me. This is ridiculous, Lyle. You can't just change the locks without discussing it. It's my house. I can do whatever I want. The words hung in the air between us. Nina's face went through several expressions: confusion, anger, and finally a hint of fear as she realized something fundamental had changed. What do you mean, your house? I mean, the deed is in my name. Has been since Saturday. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, trying to understand what had happened to her carefully laid plans. That's impossible. We both own this house. Not anymore. Check the county records if you don't believe me. Nina grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I'm calling Terry Darnell. This is some kind of mistake. Terry's the one who filed the paperwork. Feel free to call her. She slammed the door behind her, and I heard her car start with an angry roar of the engine. I knew she'd spend the next few hours frantically making phone calls, trying to understand how her perfect plan had turned into a nightmare. But the evening's entertainment wasn't over yet. Around 9 o'clock, Max and Clive called my cell phone. We need to talk, he said without preamble. About what? You know what? Nina told me about the house, the bank accounts, all of it. What's your game, Rake? No game. Just protecting my assets from a federal investigation. Cut the bullcrap. There's no investigation, and we both know it. I smiled, though he couldn't see it through the phone. Then you shouldn't have any problem proving that in court. Listen, you want to play hardball? Fine. But Nina deserves better than this. She deserves to be happy. Nina deserves exactly what she's getting. What's that supposed to mean? It means I know about the affair, the apartment, the divorce lawyer, all of it. Did you really think I was too stupid to figure it out? Silence on the other end of the line. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. Nina can file for divorce whenever she wants. But she's going to do it with nothing but the clothes on her back and whatever money you're willing to give her. Because everything else belongs to me now. You can't do this. Pennsylvania is a community property state. Community property requires proof of joint ownership. Check the paperwork, Maxon. Nina signed away her rights to everything. Another long silence. You bastard. Maybe. But I'm a bastard who learned from the best. Nina's been teaching me about deception for months. He hung up without another word. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat in my recliner, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Satisfaction. Not happiness exactly, but the deep contentment that comes from a job well done. Nina and Maxon had played a game they thought they understood, using rules they assumed I didn't know. But they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd underestimated their opponent. Now they were about to learn that the steelworker they'd dismissed as simple and stupid had been several moves ahead of them all along. Nina didn't come home that night. I wasn't surprised. She'd probably gone straight to Maxon's warehouse apartment, looking for comfort and strategy from her lover. They'd spend the evening trying to figure out how to salvage their plans, maybe calling lawyers or researching their legal options. Let them. Every hour they spent in denial was another hour I had to prepare for the next phase. The call came at 7 the next morning. Nina's voice, tight with controlled anger. I want to meet. Today. We need to discuss the situation. What situation? Don't play games, Lyle. I know what you've done. I protected our assets from federal seizure. You should be thanking me. There is no federal investigation, and you know it. I talked to 3 lawyers yesterday. This is fraud. Prove it. She was quiet for a moment, probably realizing that proving fraud would require admitting she'd planned to steal our assets during a divorce. Not exactly a winning legal strategy. Murphy's Tavern, she finally said. 6 o'clock. Come alone. The tavern was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few regulars watching the evening news and nursing their beers. Nina sat in a back booth, looking smaller than I remembered. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, yesterday's makeup, wrinkled clothes, hair that hadn't seen a brush. She'd been crying, though she was trying to hide it. Sit down, she said without looking at me. I slid into the booth across from her, noting the wedding ring was still on her finger. Interesting choice. Was she planning to play the devoted wife, or did she simply forget to take it off? You want to explain what you think you're accomplishing? She asked. I'm accomplishing exactly what I set out to accomplish. You're the one who seems confused. This isn't you, Lyle. You're not vindictive. You're not cruel. I laughed, surprising both of us. You're right. The old Lyle wasn't vindictive or cruel. The old Lyle was trusting and naive and stupid enough to believe his wife when she said she loved him. I do love you. No, you don't. You love the idea of having a backup plan while you figured out how to trade up to something better? Nina's face crumpled slightly. That's not fair. Fair? I leaned forward, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Let me tell you what's not fair. What's not fair is listening to a voice message where my wife calls me stupid and laughs about how easy I am to deceive. What's not fair is working 60-hour weeks to support a woman who's using our money to rent an apartment with her lover. She went pale. How did I know? Because unlike what you told Carla, I'm not actually that stupid. I've known about Maxon since Sophie's wedding. I've known about the apartment since December. I've known about the divorce lawyer since last week. Nina stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. The question isn't how I knew, I continued. The question is what I'm going to do about it. What do you want, Lyle? Money? Do you want me to pay you to let me go? I don't want your money. I want justice. Justice for what? For growing apart? For falling out of love? That happens to half the marriages in America. Justice for 8 years of lies. Justice for being treated like a fool while you planned your escape. Justice for listening to you mock me to your friends. I stood up, dropping a 20 on the table for my untouched beer. File for divorce whenever you want, Nina. Take whatever you can prove you own. But you're going to do it honestly, in daylight, where everyone can see exactly what kind of person you really are. She grabbed my arm as I started to leave. Please, Lyle, don't do this. We can work something out. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. The same hand that had touched Max and Clive, signed apartment leases, planned my betrayal. We did work something out. This is it. I pulled away and walked out of the tavern, leaving Nina alone in the back booth with the wreckage of her perfect plan. But the evening wasn't over. An hour later, as I was heating dinner in my newly secure house, someone started pounding on the front door. I looked through the window and saw Max and Clive standing on my porch, his face flushed with anger. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. You son of a bitch, he said. What did you say to her? I told her the truth, something she's not used to hearing. She's upstairs crying her eyes out. Nina's a good person, and you're destroying her. Nina destroyed herself. I'm just cleaning up the mess. Maxon stepped closer. trying to use his height to intimidate me. It might have worked on other people, soft corporate types who'd never been in a real fight. But I'd spent 20 years in steel mills, dealing with men who settled disputes with their fists. "You think you're so clever," he said. "But this isn't over. I've got money now, enough to fight you in court for years. I'll make sure Nina gets what she deserves." Nina's getting exactly what she deserves. What's that supposed to mean? I smiled. It means you don't know your girlfriend as well as you think you do. What are you talking about? Ask her about the voice message she sent me by accident. Ask her what she really thinks about the kind of man who falls for married women. Maxon's confident expression wavered slightly. Or better yet, I continued, ask her why she didn't divorce me 6 months ago, when she first started planning her new life. Ask her why she needed to clean out our bank accounts first. You're lying. Am I? Then why did she rent that apartment under your name? Why did she wait until you sold your company to file divorce papers? You think you were rescuing her from an unhappy marriage, but she was using you the same way she used me. I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. Maxon was successful, confident, used to being in control. But he was also the kind of man who'd built his self-image on being smarter than everyone else. The possibility that Nina had manipulated him was a direct challenge to his ego. The difference between us, I said, is that I was married to her for 8 years before I figured out what she was. You've known her for what, 6 months? And you're already planning to spend millions on her? Maxon opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. He stood there for another moment, his anger slowly being replaced by uncertainty. Finally, he turned and walked back to his Range Rover without another word. I watched him drive away, then went back inside and finished my dinner. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, lawyers, court filings, probably more confrontations with Nina and her allies. But tonight, I was content to sit in my house, eating a meal I'd prepared myself, surrounded by things that belonged entirely to me. For the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The divorce papers arrived on a Friday, delivered by a process server who found me in the foundry break room. Nina was requesting dissolution of marriage due to irreconcilable differences, along with her fair share of marital assets and spousal support. It was a standard filing, probably prepared by some junior associate who'd never handled a case where the husband had already moved all the assets beyond his wife's reach. I called Terry Darnell from the plant parking lot. "They're asking for half of everything," I told her. "Which is exactly nothing since there's nothing in your joint names anymore. Did you expect them to just give up?" "No, but I wanted to see how they'd play it." "Well, now you know. Nina's lawyer is going to argue that you committed fraud by transferring assets without her knowledge. They'll demand an emergency hearing to freeze everything until the court can sort it out. Can they do that? They can try. But you've got documentation showing Nina signed the transfer papers willingly, and you've got a reasonable explanation for why the transfers were necessary. It'll come down to whether the judge believes your story about the federal investigation. What are the odds?" Terry was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, 50-50. Depends on the judge, depends on how good Nina's lawyer is, depends on whether they can prove you fabricated the investigation letter. And if they can prove it, then you're looking at criminal fraud charges, and Nina gets everything anyway." I thanked Terry and hung up, considering my options. The legal battle could drag on for months, costing both sides thousands in attorney fees while generating uncertain results. Nina and Maxon probably assumed I'd cave under pressure, agree to a settlement that gave her a substantial portion of our assets in exchange for a quick divorce. They were wrong again. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my sister Maggie in Johnstown. "Lyle?" she said, surprised. "Is everything okay?" "Not really. Nina and I are getting divorced." "Oh, honey, I'm sorry." "What happened?" I gave her the basic facts, the affair, the deception, the legal maneuvering. Maggie listened without interrupting, making small, sympathetic noises at appropriate moments. "I have to tell you something," she said when I finished. "I saw this coming." "What do you mean?" "Last Christmas, when you brought Nina to dinner, I caught her texting someone during Grace. When I asked her about it, she got defensive, said it was work. But no logistics company sends emergency messages on Christmas Day. Why didn't you say anything?" "What was I supposed to say?" "I think your wife is cheating because she got a text message. You would have thought I was being paranoid." Maggie was right. 6 months ago, I would have dismissed any criticism of Nina as jealousy or misunderstanding. I'd been that committed to the illusion of our happy marriage. There's something else, Maggie continued. Remember Sophie's wedding? I was talking to some of Nina's friends, and they kept making these comments about how patient you were, how understanding, like they were impressed you weren't more suspicious. They knew. Some of them did. Maybe not the details, but they knew something was going on. So Nina's betrayal had been an open secret among her social circle, something they discussed and joked about while I remained obliviously faithful. The humiliation cut deeper than the adultery itself. What are you going to do now? Maggie asked. Whatever it takes to make sure she doesn't profit from betraying me? Be careful, Lyle. Revenge has a way of consuming the person seeking it. This isn't revenge, it's justice. But even as I said the words, I wondered if there was really a difference. The following Monday brought news from Jerry. Your boy Maxon is asking questions about you, he said over the phone. He hired a private investigator to look into your background, your finances, whatever dirt they can find. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests he's not as confident about his girlfriend as he was a week ago. The investigator's been talking to your coworkers, your neighbors, checking public records. They're looking for evidence that you're some kind of criminal mastermind. I laughed. And what are they finding? That you're exactly what you appear to be, a steelworker who pays his bills on time and minds his own business. No criminal record, no secret bank accounts, no hidden vices. It's actually kind of disappointing from an investigation standpoint. What about Nina? Are they digging into her background too? That's the interesting part. The investigator asked me about Nina, but when I mentioned the voice message you have of her mocking you, he got real quiet. Makes me think Maxon's having second thoughts about his investment. Good. Doubt was a powerful weapon, especially against someone whose self-image depended on being smarter than everyone else. If Maxon was questioning Nina's motives, it would create tension between them at exactly the wrong time. One more thing, Jerry said. The investigator asked about your military service. I never served in the military. That's what I told him, but he seemed surprised. Apparently, someone's been telling stories about your background that don't match reality. Interesting. Nina had been embellishing my history, probably to make me seem more dangerous or unstable. It was a clever strategy. Paint the cuckolded husband as a potential threat, creating sympathy for the poor woman trying to escape an unhappy marriage. But it was also a strategy that could backfire if the lies were too obvious. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor at the foundry. Curtis Gable, my old rival from the steel union, walked into the break room wearing an expensive suit and a politician's smile. Curtis had been elected to city council 2 years ago, trading his hard hat for a tie and a desk job. We'd never gotten along during our union days. He was ambitious and manipulative, while I preferred to focus on the work itself. Lyle Rake, he said, extending his hand. Heard you were having some personal troubles. News travels fast. Small town, even when it's a big city. Mind if I sit down? I gestured to an empty chair. Curtis settled himself carefully, trying not to wrinkle his suit. I'll get straight to the point, he said. I had a visit from someone who claims to be your wife's boyfriend. Rich guy, tech entrepreneur, very concerned about your mental state. Is that right? He seems to think you might be planning to hurt someone. Suggested that maybe the city should be aware of potential domestic violence issues involving a municipal employee. I set down my coffee cup and looked Curtis in the eye. And what did you tell him? I told him that Lyle Rake was a lot of things. Stubborn, antisocial, obsessed with those damn books, but he wasn't violent. I also told him that making false accusations against city employees was a good way to end up in legal trouble. Thanks, Curtis shrugged. I may not like you personally, but I'm not going to let some outsider smear a union man based on gossip and speculation. He stood up, brushing imaginary dust from his jacket. Word of advice, though. Whatever you're planning, be smart about it. The rich boy's got connections, and he's not going to give up easily. After Curtis left, I sat in the break room thinking about escalation. Nina and Maxon were getting desperate, trying to paint me as unstable or dangerous. It was a sign that their legal options were limited and they were grasping for alternative strategies, but it was also a warning. If they were willing to spread lies about my mental state, they might be willing to do worse things to protect their interests. I needed to move faster. The warehouse fire started at 2:17 in the morning on a Thursday. I know the exact time because that's when my phone rang. Jerry's voice, tight with urgency. Your boy Maxon's building is burning, he said. Fire department's on scene, but it looks bad. I got dressed and drove to the Strip District, joining the crowd of onlookers watching flames pour from the upper floors of Maxon's converted warehouse. Fire trucks surrounded the building, their hoses creating streams of water that seemed inadequate against the orange glow consuming the structure. Started in the basement, I heard one firefighter tell another. Electrical fire, looks like. Spread fast because of all the renovation materials. Maxon stood across the street in his pajamas and winter coat, watching his home burn with the hollow expression of someone whose world had just collapsed. Nina was beside him, clutching his arm and crying. I felt nothing watching their distress. No satisfaction, no guilt, just the cold observation of cause and effect playing out according to plan. The fire burned for 3 hours before being declared under control. By dawn, the building was a blackened shell, uninhabitable and probably unsalvageable. Whatever belongings Maxon and Nina had stored there were ash. I drove home and went back to bed, sleeping soundly for the first time in weeks. The investigation took 4 days. Faulty wiring in the basement, exacerbated by flammable renovation materials and inadequate fire suppression systems. The insurance company called it an accident, though they'd probably spend months fighting over the payout. Maxon and Nina were suddenly homeless, with most of their possessions destroyed and their carefully laid plans in ruins. They moved into a cheap hotel while searching for temporary housing, their resources stretched thin by the unexpected catastrophe. I knew about the fire's cause because I'd started it. Not directly, I wasn't stupid enough to be caught with gasoline and matches, but I knew about electrical systems from my work at the foundry, and I knew how to create the conditions that would make an accidental fire inevitable. The basement of Maxon's building had old wiring that hadn't been updated during the conversion. All it took was a small modification to the electrical panel, creating an overload that would eventually cause sparks in an area surrounded by sawdust and paint fumes. I'd made the modification 3 weeks earlier, during another late-night visit to the building. The timing was unpredictable. The fire could have started immediately or taken months to develop. But eventually, physics would do what physics always did. The fire was just another accident, like Maxon's brake failure. Bad luck that seemed to follow people who interfered with my marriage. A week later, Terry Darnell called with an update on the divorce proceedings. Nina's lawyer wants to settle, she said. They're dropping most of their demands in exchange for a quick, uncontested dissolution. What are they asking for? Essentially nothing. She keeps her personal belongings, her car, and any assets she can prove are separately hers. You keep everything else. Why the sudden change of heart? Terry was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I think they're scared. Nina's boyfriend lost his home in that fire, and they're running out of money for legal fees. They want this over with. What about the fraud allegations? Dropped. They can't prove you fabricated that letter about the federal investigation. And frankly, they don't want to risk a lengthy court battle that might expose other issues. Other issues. Like Nina's affair, her plans to steal our assets, her lies about my character and mental state. She'd realized that a public divorce trial would reveal things she preferred to keep private. I'll take the deal, I said. 2 weeks later, I signed the divorce papers in Terry's office. Nina wasn't present. She'd waived her right to attend, probably to avoid another confrontation. The whole process took less than an hour. Afterwards, I drove through the Strip District, past the ruins of Maxon's warehouse. A demolition crew was clearing away the debris, preparing the lot for whatever would be built next. There was no sign that 2 people's lives had been destroyed along with the building. I felt the same emotional emptiness I'd experienced since discovering Nina's betrayal. Not happiness, not sadness, just the quiet satisfaction of a job completed according to specifications. That evening, my phone rang. Nina's number appeared on the screen, but I almost didn't answer. We had nothing left to discuss. The divorce was final. Our assets divided, our marriage officially dissolved, but curiosity won. Hello, Nina. I know it was you. Her voice was flat, exhausted. The brake failure, the fire, all of it. I know you did it. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. You planned this whole thing from the beginning. You let me think I was outsmarting you while you destroyed everything I cared about. You destroyed everything you cared about. I just refused to be collateral damage. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear traffic in the background. She was calling from somewhere public, probably a payphone or borrowed cell phone. Why? She finally asked. Why couldn't you just let me go? Because you didn't just want to leave. You wanted to steal from me while pretending to be the victim. You wanted to mock me to your friends while taking half of everything I'd worked for. I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did. You planned every detail except for the possibility that I might fight back. Another long silence. What happens now? She asked. Now you live with the consequences of your choices, just like everyone else. Lyle, I hung up. An hour later, Maxon called. You destroyed us, he said without preamble. You destroyed yourselves. I just refused to help. Nina's in a shelter. Did you know that? A homeless shelter because she can't afford rent and her friends won't help her anymore? That's unfortunate. You feel nothing? No guilt, no regret? I feel exactly what Nina felt when she was planning to rob me blind. Nothing. You're a monster. I'm a man who learned from an expert teacher. He hung up as well. I sat in my recliner that night, alone in the house that was now entirely mine, drinking bourbon and reading a worn copy of The Grapes of Wrath. Outside, snow was falling again, covering the city in white silence. My phone didn't ring again,